for any questions he might have for our panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it, and congrats again on the win. Representative Hageman, I have some questions on the Separation of Powers Restoration Act, if you don't mind. What is the result when courts rely on agency interpretation of laws instead of the letter of the law?
Well, what happens is it's an unconstitutional putting a thumb on the scale from one party to the lawsuit. So just from a very practical standpoint, and as a practitioner and someone who's tried a lot of cases in federal court against federal agencies, I can tell you the practical effect is that when you go to court, the guy sitting in the black robe is kind of on the other side of the team when they apply deference type of standard, whether it's Chevron or it is our or Kaiser. Thank you. Because what they're saying is we're going to believe what the agency says here in terms of the interpretation rather than reading the language themselves. So what has happened since the Chevron decision was issued in the early 1980s is that the agencies have become much more powerful at the expense of the individuals and the businesses that they're regulating. So the practical effect is that the courts are abdicating their responsibility of determining what the law is, turning it over to the agencies, which are biased and have their own reason of why they want to interpret the laws and the regulations the way that they do. An example is the recent WOTUS rule that has come out of this administration. It was just last week that the Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, concluded that the WOTUS rule that that applied to the sockets at the time was not based upon statute. That's an example of agencies overreaching, and then the courts, if they allow that to happen, it's just a travesty of justice.
Some on the other side of the aisle have said that if this bill passes, goes into law, it's going to prevent agencies from exercising their so-called expertise. Would you like to talk about that and how that's not what this bill does?
Well, it isn't what this bill does, and we're so often told that it's for the experts to be making these policy decisions, and that having Congress make the ultimate decision when it comes to, in this case, the REINS Act making the ultimate decision when it comes to regulations that have an impact of over $100 million is unworkable, and that's just flat not true. For one thing, what people really need to understand is that the agency's expertise lies in the administrative process itself. The Biden cabinet is just an example. There isn't a person in the Biden cabinet that has ever worked in the private sector, not one. They aren't experts on farming or handling of livestock or producing oil or managing grocery stores or cooking on gas stoves or versus electric stoves. They're not the ones who manage the wildlife, even though we have a Fish and Wildlife Service. The Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't manage wildlife, the states do. They don't manage water quantity or water quality. Again, the states do. So when they talk about expertise and why we have to defer to the experts, the reality is the regulations that they're adopting are inherently biased in and of themselves because they're political decisions. They're not based upon expertise.
Thanks. And Representative Hageman, let's just talk about the REINS Act briefly. My friends across the aisle are trying to say that the REINS Act will, they're arguing that it will harm public health. Is there any truth to that?
No, again, what it is it's focused only on those regulations that have an impact, an economic impact of $100 million or more. So there's a huge swath of regulations. I would prefer for that number be lower because, again, I think that Congress ought to exercise its rightful responsibility to legislate. So that's one of the things is that we have the statutes in place. Again, we have the Clean Air Act. We have the Clean Water Act. Those things are implemented right now, but they're not implemented by the EPA. Again, they're implemented by the states. They're implemented by the Department of Environmental Quality in Wyoming, for example. They're implemented by the municipalities, whether it's Rollins or Cheyenne or Gillette or Casper. That's how the laws are implemented right now. The regulations, again, are a political statement and have become biased in and of themselves. So what I would argue is that what this bill will do is, number one, ensure that we are complying with the Constitution, but it also will ensure that the American public has a voice in what our laws are.
Thank you, Representative Hageman. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania.